I absolutely love farming worms. Their castings, when mixed with the soil, are a magnet for both water and nutrients. You plant a little bit of this with every seedling and you're giving them the best start to life. Mix some with some water. And you've got the perfect pick-me-up for any potted plant. Today I want to show you 3 different ways that you can get farming worms for free. This is my basic free-range worm farm. You might have one behind the shed. It's just a plastic pot. It's got drainage holes in the bottom, which means when the weather's too warm or too cold, the worms can actually escape and hide underneath the pot. And when, oh g'day, yes. When the conditions are right, they come back in. It's low responsibility. They look after themselves. So just add the scraps onto one side and cover it to keep it nice and cool, and then I can harvest the castings from the other side. It keeps me in enough castings to make my seed raising mix, but I want to show you how you can use this concept in the garden. Hey Squiddy. What I'm making here is actually a free-range worm farm that's going to go into the garden. I've drilled a whole lot of holes around the outside. They're about finger thick. And it's really important to make sure that you do some in the bottom, because the last thing you want this bucket to do is fill up like a bucket. I've dug this hole, which is essentially as deep as the bucket is, because that's where it's going. You want to make sure that the level of the top is about the same as the garden bed. And you also need to make sure that the soil is making contact, so backfill it really well. The great thing about a system like this is if you build it, they will come. You don't have to buy the worms. When you start feeding organic matter into the bucket, they're going to access it through those holes on the side. You need to just chuck in whatever you've got. I've got some old straw, some kitchen scraps, weeds, even old manure. And if you're not putting this farm somewhere that you're growing food, you can even use it to process doggy doo. So put in as much material as you can fill a bucket and then water it in. You keep it nice and dark in there because that's what they need. Lid goes on, and then to keep them cool, the mulch goes over the top. You can continue to add material to this as it breaks down, as often as you like. And then in a few months, when you're full of castings, you can use them in one of 2 ways. You can lift the bucket out of the ground and take them anywhere in the garden, or flush it with water and wash that goodness into the surrounding soil. It's a little bit more like a worm hotel than a worm farm, this one. But what if you don't have a garden bed to sink a worm farm into? Well, don't fear. You can farm worms in a garage, in a courtyard, and even on a balcony. It's a fantastic way to take care of your food scraps at home. You can do it using a polystyrene box. Honestly, I wish I couldn't find these in bins, but they are absolutely everywhere, so I like to put them to use. They're really well insulated, which makes them great for farming worms. They need to stay really cool, but there's one thing I need to do first, and that is to make sure that there's adequate drainage, because they never want to sit in water. So I'm just going to measure the diameter with the hose and then carefully cut this out. So then I'm just going to fit my piece of pipe to behave like a little tap at the base of the worm farm. Now that will drain freely, but I still want to make sure that the worms won't sit in any water. So I'm going to put a thin layer of gravel in the base to act as extra drainage. So the next step is just a layer of fabric that's going to stop the worms ending up in the gravel. While the other farms are free range, this one is really self-contained, which means I'm actually going to need to add the worms. So to do that, I need to put down a bedding material. They need something cool and moist. You could use some homemade compost. This is coconut fibre just soaked in water, which works really well, or a combination of the two. Now it's time to add the worms. I've harvested some from my own worm farm. I'm going to add them onto the surface of the bedding. And then because I've only got a small number here, I'm actually going to add a whole lot of castings as well from the farm, because they will be absolutely full of eggs. Now, I'm not actually going to feed these guys until they've settled in. I'll leave them for a couple of weeks and then I'll feed small amounts to start with until that population builds up. But a nice little insulation layer of wet straw that they stay nice and cool, but also if they get hungry, they got something to eat. And then, as always on a gardening show, we water them in. It's good to do this once every couple of weeks to make sure that you keep them moist, about the consistency of a moist sponge. And that way, you can always reap the rewards. This stuff is gold for your garden. I've put a couple of air holes in that lid, and now all that's left to do is find a nice shady spot for it to live. And really, I reckon every household should have worms. They turn waste materials into absolute gold for the garden. And building a farm like this, it's really easy. It costs you nothing and you can do it anywhere. So I reckon you should give it a go. What are you waiting for? Get a wriggle on.